All right, here we go with some killer TypeScript interview questions. For those of you who haven't had too much exposure with TypeScript, there's a whole world out there that you need to know. And if you ever walk into an interview where they mention TypeScript in the job description, you might want to be prepared, because this one is a little bit close to my heart, because I remember back in like 2018, when TypeScript wasn't necessarily all too common yet, I was looking into it and I had an interview, I had a phone interview, and the interviewer asked me if I know about TypeScript, and I was like, yeah, I've been looking into it. It's pretty cool because back in the day I started programming with Java, so it seems familiar to me. And then he just opened up a barrage of questions about TypeScript. And it was like, he kept asking me questions, and I'm like, I don't think I'm prepared to answer those questions, those in concept, because I haven't studied TypeScript. So I might not be able to answer those particular questions with that terminology. And he just kept asking me questions. I was like, I don't think I can answer this. I just can't. I wasn't prepared for a TypeScript interview question. I thought it was just a JavaScript role. And he kept asking me. It was like 3 questions, 4 questions. I was like, dude, I think we gotta stop with the TypeScript questions. So after that, I went back to the recruiter and I said, this guy kept hammering me with TypeScript questions as if he was trying to prove a point or something. And I was like, if you present more candidates to this particular position, you have to tell them to be prepared for an intensive TypeScript interview. And then ironically after that, he provided feedback to the recruiter saying he doesn't know basic object orientation. Then I was like, okay, after that, I was like, let me just dive into it, because if this ever happens again, if people are going to be asking questions like about TypeScript like that, then I gotta be prepared. You know, because sometimes you know how to code it, right? When you look at it and you know how to code it, but sometimes you might not know how to answer a particular question. Like for example, in my background, I would have called it typecasting, but he asked, what is type assertion? And I just was not familiar with type assertion. I knew what casting was, obviously, I just didn't know that name. And ironically there, if you even look it up today and look up typecasting on MDN or W3 Schools, they'll say TypeScript typecasting. They actually don't say type assertion. So if you get into an interview, you're gonna wanna know both. You're gonna wanna know what casting is and assertion. Just be familiar with those words. It's basically the same exact thing, just some people might call it something different. All right, so what is TypeScript? TypeScript is a type-enforced object-oriented programming language. It is a superset of JavaScript, right? Not a subset, it is a superset that rests on top of JavaScript. So here's the thing, TypeScript code is converted to JavaScript. So TypeScript is supported wherever JavaScript is supported, whether it be in the browser or in a Node application, or basically any place that has a VA runtime engine. And it is a static type programming language, not a dynamic type like with JavaScript. The basic difference between the two is that in a statically typed programming language, it is checked during compile time, but in a dynamic type, it's checked during runtime. So you get errors out there in runtime, out there in production, as opposed to compile time when you're actually coding. So you might get some funky stuff like with JavaScript. Like for example, you would do 2 plus 2, where the first 2 is a number and the second 2 is a string, and it will output 22. However, if you do 2 times 2, where the first is a number and the second is a string, it'll actually output 4. So with TypeScript, you can catch things like this when you're actually doing the code. Next interview question. What are getters and setters? They offer control over the object and how we access the object. A getter begins with the keyword get, a setter begins with the keyword set. And for example, here you have get age, where it's supposed to return the age, of course, and you have set age, where it actually passes in a variable called my age, where the type is a number. And what is the purpose of the tsconfig.json file? So this is where we specify different options to the compiler on how we actually want to compile this particular TypeScript project. Next one, what access modifiers are supported by TypeScript? Protected, private, and public. The difference between these is that in a private class is that an attribute of that class can only be accessed by that class itself and nothing else. If it's a protected class, that means that not only can things be accessed from within that class, but could also be accessed from subclasses as well. So if that class has actually been extended to other subclasses, you can access the protected class from those subclasses. And then public, of course, is that any member has access to it. And then what are the disadvantages of TypeScript? Well, I don't know if there are many, I mean, why use TypeScript if you can just use Java instead? But really, I guess the only thing is that there's an extra compilation step in converting TypeScript to JavaScript, so it might actually slow it down the compile time a little bit. So it isn't much. If you can think of any disadvantages, let me know in the comments below. And what is a type alias? Well, it allows you to represent different TypeScript types with a different name. And this is different from an interface, which is to explicitly enforce a class to adhere to a particular data contract. What is declaration merger? This happens when the TypeScript compiler merges two or more interfaces into a single declaration. And going back to the difference between types and interfaces, this is not possible with types. An error would occur. But you can, however, merge two different interfaces into a type by creating an intersection between those interfaces. What is the in operator in TypeScript? And the answer is it checks if an object contains a specified property. You can see here, if age in this particular object being passed in, right? Age is a property here. And boom. And what is type inference? Well, TypeScript can infer or come to its own conclusion about what it thinks the type should be for this particular variable. It's something you don't want to do if you're using TypeScript. It sort of defeats the purpose of why you're actually using TypeScript. So what you want to do is assert. You just want to be assertive, which is probably where that term comes from, type assertion. So how are objects created in TypeScript? Well, basically, objects are a collection of keys and values, right? Think JSON. In other programming languages, they're called associative arrays. They're sometimes called associative arrays by old school people. I remember I was once doing Roku development and it was just called an associative array. And what are the different data types in TypeScript? Well, there's number, Boolean, string, void, null, undefined, and a new one is unknown. The new one as of just a couple years ago was unknown. You might want to look into that one too. And what is a namespace? It's used to group functionality logically together. They include interfaces, classes, functions, and variables. The namespace keyword followed by the name of the actual namespace can group them together. So you see we have here a namespace is called validation. Inside of it, we have an interface called string validator. We have a few variables here, const. We have some classes over here. And so yeah, everything is grouped together logically into this particular namespace. And what is type assertion? It's used to assert type if you did not infer it. You can use it with the as keyword or with the brackets, right? Bracket is an old school way of saying angle brackets. I just got used to saying brackets. But one thing to keep in mind is that brackets cannot be used in TSX files when you're coding React. All right, that's about it. Well, like I said, TypeScript is a whole world out there. There's probably like 100 other different interview questions that they might actually ask you. So if you want to really be prepared, just go through a tutorial. It'll take you, a few hours or maybe an hour or two a day for like a week or whatever it may be, and just become a pro at it. And by the way, check it right here for my other videos on interview questions.